Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
In today's dynamic and diverse work environments, bridging the generational gap has emerged as a crucial topic demanding our attention. With a workforce that encompasses multiple generations, including baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Gen Z. Understanding and addressing the challenges that arise from these generational differences is of utmost importance. By fostering effective communication, collaboration, and mutual understanding among generations, organizations can unlock the full potential of their workforce. Therefore, delving into the intricacies of bridging the generational gap is essential to foster a cohesive and thriving work environment that embraces the strengths and perspectives of each generation. So without further ado, let us embark on a journey of exploring ways to bridge the generational gap in the workplace. Hello listeners, welcome to another episode of Vantage Influencers Podcast, where we explore a wide range of HR topics that are sure to grab your attention and inspire you. I'm your host, Sanjeevani Saikya, and today we will be having a conversation on bridging the generation gap in the workplace. For the same, I have with me Leanna Bautista, Chief People Officer at TouchTunes. Hi, Leanna.
Hi, Sanjeev.
First of all, I would like to thank you for giving your invaluable time and joining us in today's episode. Before we dive deeper into today's topic, bridging the generation gap in the workplace, could you kindly walk us through your corporate journey so far?
Sure. Happy to be here, and thank you so much for having me. This is a great topic, and happy to share some ideas and thoughts on it and talk with you about it. Just a little bit, and by way of background, I'm the Chief People Officer at TouchTunes, and have been here with the company for about 4 months now. And previous to this, worked at e-commerce company Packable as the Chief People Officer, and then also spent time at PepsiCo, Pfizer, and Tory Burch in my career. Spent a lot of time as a talent management, organizational effectiveness professional, as well as an HR business partner, but love this role as a CPO of being able to bring together all the different aspects of HR to help set that strategy.
Great. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. It has truly been remarkable, Leanna. I think we can now dive straight into the topic. Since in this episode, we'll be talking about bridging the generation gap in the workplace, I feel it's important to know why is it so crucial for organizations to overcome generational differences. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the reality that we have is that we have so many different generations that are in the workplace at the same time. And people come from different experiences, perspectives, and ways of working. And being able to find commonality, bring people together, and build a community that encompasses the best of all of the different generations is an unlock for an organization to be able to take advantage and leverage the skills, experiences across the generations can really make it so that you've got a much more well-rounded viewpoint and perspective as you would with all different types of demographics and diversities and experiences that people have. So truly being able to think of this as unlock is what will help to drive the performance of your teams, your organizations, and ultimately your individuals.
True. So if I have to ask you, what are the 3 primary reasons you think having multiple generations in the workplace is very, very important? Could you just tell me 3 very specific ones?
Sure. So I think the baby boomers and the Generation X bring a lot of the structure and the process and some of the components of professional maturity that have been driving our corporate world for so long. And that really continues to move organizations forward. But then you start to see the millennials and Gen Z bring in new ways of thinking, a lot more in terms of employee agency and how they can help shape the future, being really focused on being purpose-driven and how to help the organization drive in a way that is beyond just delivering the business outcomes, but being more purpose-driven is something that we're seeing millennials and Gen Z bring into the workplace more. And so I think those two kind of sides of the spectrum, and obviously there's a lot of gray, and those are some stereotypes that I've made, but I think those different perspectives together help to shape an organization and keep some of the rigor and process that have made corporate America work really well, but also bringing in a lot of more entrepreneurial spirit.
True. When working with teams that consist of members from different generations, there can be numerous challenges. And I guess it's important to identify those challenges in order to create unity across different age cohorts in the workplace. So could you kindly throw some light on the major challenges that arise when working with multi-generational teams?
So what I would say is actually, I think it starts with this idea of stereotypes or viewpoints of I can't relate, or how this person reacts to things doesn't resonate with me, right? And it could start with this separation of they're not like me. And again, I mentioned earlier, this happens a lot in all different types of cohorts, but in generationally, right? It is not just about age, right? And the years you're born. It's also about your experiences and how you, how far along in life and your career you are changes your perspective, right? And being able to appreciate the perspective that the other group brings in is something that comes with time. And I think if you have a group that you don't have open dialogue and discussion, there's certain assumptions being made about people's work ethics or their openness to change, etc. That's when you see the challenges arise. And that multi-generational team is not as effective because you start to have splintering of people based on this. If you can actually help to acknowledge some of those differences and bring people together, hopefully that resolves some of the negative stereotypes to see the benefits of the different perspectives coming in.
Yes, I agree. Leanna, I think you'll agree that differences in communication styles and language can create a gap that may hinder collaborations. I was wondering if we could discuss the role of communication and language in bridging the generation gap.
Yeah, so I think even how people communicate starts with their approach, right? And their identity and where they're coming from, right? And starting to use more common language of inclusivity, where you're seeking to understand versus language that is very clear, like there's a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things. Language that seemed to imply judgment, I think drives the difference between the generational gaps more. Right. So if somebody who is of the baby boomer or Generation X has a very strong stance of we've always done it this way, this is how we should do it, and their language and their way of communicating conveys that, that may not be as engaging of getting somebody in the Gen Z who's just coming into the workplace, or a millennial who is more around how do we try something new, has that growth mindset because they maybe haven't had that same years of experience, or they're just a different perspective on how to view things, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The kind of closed language may shut them down and make it so that they're not engaging and having that kind of full team relationship, having separation between the generations in your workforce, right? Where if you can use your language to be really, really purposeful and use more coaching language of help me to understand why this has worked before, and do we think it could work here? Or what ideas do you have? Or have you seen other things out like this out there? We recently did some sessions around growth mindset here. And one of the things we talked about is during different sessions, how do you bring in people with different perspectives and ask questions in a way that get them to step outside their comfort zone and think from somebody else's perspective or have empathy? And so as much as you can use that type of language around open-ended questions, trying to seek to understand and build your empathy about where somebody else is coming from or why they might believe something, that's going to help to break down some of those barriers between relationships and build a much more cohesive team.
Correct. Here, do you think creating cross-functional teams that include members of different generations can also help break down silos and foster collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you build a team from various perspectives, it helps to break down the different barriers that may be based on different demographics. I don't necessarily think you'd want to purposely say, like, we're building this team for the sole purpose of having somebody from different generations. But I think as you build a cross-functional team, being able to say, what are the profiles of the people on this team? What might they be bringing? What's the perspective? What's the experience that they're bringing to the table? And how do we make sure we're having a balance of that that includes different generational perspectives is really a smart thing to do as you're approaching solving a business challenge.
Yes. I believe that employers, again, have a huge role to play in closing the divide between age groups and harnessing the strengths of each generation in the workplace. So I wanted to know your take on how employers can effectively do that, because I believe your suggestions will help them in a longer run to attract and engage employees of different age groups and retain them. Also, Leanna, I'm curious to know how employees can bridge that gap too. So I would like to know both the perspectives together.
Okay, so starting with the organization, I think it starts with your culture. And are you creating an inclusive culture that really is valuing and appreciating various perspectives, right? And it comes from everything from your corporate level communications to your DE&I initiatives to the programs that you run within your organization. So, for example, one of the things that we do here is we have a formal mentoring partnership and program. And as we look at that mentoring program, we make sure that we're really purposefully connecting people who are not the same necessarily, right? That will have different perspectives. And generation is one of those components that we look at. How do we take somebody who brings different experiences, different perspective, and link them with somebody who's newer to the workforce, and how can they help to guide them? But we don't just see that as the more experienced individual mentoring the less experienced individual. We see it as almost a reverse mentoring where the mentor is learning also from the mentee and starting to shift some of their perspective and mindset as part of it.
Yes.
I think another thing, and this is related to actually at TouchTunes, we offer a TouchTunes Unlimited service that we have jukeboxes that can go in different offices. And we've actually found something like music and being able to have people select music and play their own music in the workplace is a great way, in a more informal way, to break down the generational gaps, because it allows people to start talking about their perspective, their experiences, who they are and their backgrounds in a more informal way. And so you start to appreciate the different genres of music based on the generations. You're appreciating what was happening in somebody's life when a certain song was playing. And it starts to create this appreciation of people have experienced different things, they have different tastes, but that kind of unique unifier of music bringing people together of how they experience things and starting to have conversations. That's one example, but what are some other things that we can do around office engagement activities that kind of has people of all different generations enjoying it in a more informal way? I think being able to make it clear of everybody has things in connection, even if you're in different generations. There's other connections you can have with people, and creating an atmosphere where people start to talk about that. It is a really positive way an organization can do that.
Yes.
And then thinking from an individual perspective, I think there's two main things, right? And we always talked about this, and we talked a lot about this during the Courageous Conversations when I was at Pepsi, and we were working towards our social equality journey and educating people on the different demographics and what they experience. The two big things, and I think this very much applies to generational, is listen, ask questions. And I talked about this a little bit before, but listen.
Yes.
Be curious, right? Like that is so important for every individual. Instead of making an assumption of, oh, this person, you know, they don't understand what I experienced because they haven't done X, Y, and Z, or you know, making assumptions. Instead of making an assumption, be curious, ask questions, and then listen to what somebody's telling you, right? And start to think about where's their commonality versus where are the differences. So that's the first thing. But then the second one is then be open. think about how you can share your experiences in a way to help people understand where you're coming from and why you might be coming from things. Because a lot of the time, the assumptions can be conveyed in a really negative way, right? And the stereotypes are seen as a negative, but something like the Gen Z being really focused on employee agency, and they can make a difference, and they have this true belief of they can impact anything in this world, including their work environment, right?
Yes.
That could be seen as a negative, or it could be seen as a positive. So having people of their generation talk about why do we operate in that way, and what's the power behind why we do that, and give people more of an understanding of who you are. So it's listening and being curious about others, but being open and willing to share about where you're coming from and why you might operate the way you do. Those two traits together can create the empathy that you need to bring the two, or not two, all the different generations together to be high functioning.
True. I absolutely agree with your take. Somewhere I believe that, listening, not to reply, but to understand is, I think, very crucial. Yeah. And at the same time, being open to different perspectives. Yes, I think these two were some really key pointers that you have shared. So, Leanna, we are arriving at the end of today's episode. But before we let you go, there's one last question that both our listeners and I would love to know your take on. And the question is, what matrix or indicators can companies use to measure and track progress in fostering intergenerational understanding and bridging the generation gap in the workplace?
Yeah. As with so many areas of HR, and I'm sure you hear this a lot in your different podcasts, It's sometimes hard to find the measures, but this is one where I think how you measure engagement in your organization as well as inclusion is that survey and doing a survey, whether you do an annual survey, whether you're taking on more of a pulse approach as becoming more popular, making sure that you're asking questions in that engagement survey around just overall engagement, and then looking at your demographics to see, is there a difference between how people are experiencing our environment and what can we do to address that?
True.
And then the other one is making sure that one of those questions is specifically related to inclusivity, and do people feel like their opinions are valued? Do they feel like they are treated fairly, right? And having some of those questions, I think is a great way to start to measure this and see if there's progress being made. And it's not just measuring your employee body as a whole, but as I talked about, looking at the different demographics, understanding their take on the different questions, and then being able to be more targeted in your approach if you're seeing a gap in certain teams, functions, or across the organization.
Great. So, Leanna, we have reached the end of today's podcast. Do you have any message for our listeners? Our listeners would be delighted to hear it from you. And also, our audience might want to stay in touch with you post this podcast. So it would be great if you could tell them how they can reach out to you.
Sure, great. No, I would just say my final message is this is an area I'm especially passionate in terms of inclusivity in the environment, right? We talked today here about the generational gap, but I think you see this across so many different demographics. And I leave the audience with this idea of everybody has an identity that's been shaped by how they grew up, where they are now in life, etc. You have commonality with so many people that you wouldn't know at the surface level. So making sure you're going below that surface level to understand somebody's full identity, make those connections and experience things from a place of understanding and empathy, I think will just make us all better people and our workplaces much more effective. So that's my advice to everybody is how do you personally do that, but drive it in your organizations as HR professionals. In terms of being in contact, would love for anybody to reach out. I have a passion and would talk to people about this, give advice, would love to hear best practices that you all have. So you can reach out to me through my email. It's Bautista, Bautista @touchtunes.com.
Lovely. It's been a pleasure to have you as our guest today. Your insights and expertise have been invaluable, and we are grateful for the time you have taken to share your knowledge with our listeners. So, Leanna, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Appreciate being asked to join, and thank you to everybody listening.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.